Hello again. So today I want to focus on a specific detail of this application, um, and I want to get into it straight away because it will be somewhat in a tutorial form, and I'm personally not a big fan of tutorials that have a whole long introduction in front of it. I just want to show you how the zooming and the panning is made. Because when I go here and I start clicking here, I have panning. And when I start using my mouse wheel, I can zoom towards the position of the mouse. Usually, when I try to integrate specific functionality into a bigger application, I create it I start with a blank slate, so I have no clutter from the application. Because when I go into the code of the actual application, you can see that there is a lot of other things going on. So not so much in the zoom event listener, but there definitely is in the, for example, mouse down functionality, because of course when I switch back quickly, when I click outside of the blocks, the functions that are being triggered are different when I click on a block, for example. Or when I want to select multiple things, I'm also clicking on the grid, but right now I'm dragging a selection box. That type of distinctions are also being made inside of the actual code. So what I usually do, yeah, here it is on mouse down. It's doing some basic things that I will need for panning, but it's also making all those kinds of distinctions, making it way harder to get to just focus on zooming and panning. So what I usually do, going back to my browser, what I usually do is taking CodePen, for example, and merely focus on what I'm trying to achieve. This keeps things much simpler. I call this zoom to mouse how with double question marks because I took some serious time to get this thing to work because it was quite difficult. I also got some help from outside to get some of the math and CSS correct. So I didn't think this was very simple. Here we have HTML, very simple, just a body with two div elements. Some really simple CSS as well, using a very standard MyoWeb reset. Just to set all the browser defaults to 0. And here we have some very, very simplistic CSS on the elements that I need. Some of those properties are interesting. I will show you later on. This is JavaScript that will eventually create this here, and this JavaScript is responsible for the functionality that I've made, like panning and zooming towards the mouse. I will also share the link to this file so you can have a look at how it's done. Here, the first method, I will go to that. So this is being called first because add stuff to contents is at the bottom, called here add stuff to contents. And what this does is simply drawing this red rectangle with these blocks. So that's just to have some visual input, some visual response while zooming and panning. So this is really simple. I will go through it quickly. I want blocks that are 25 pixels large, height and width. And I iterate 50 times. 50 times I create a random color RGB value with math random times 255, which gives me, of course, a random number of a number between 1 and 255. I create a rectangle, or I create a div element, which eventually will be the rectangle. And I set the styling on it. So I have the block size here on the width and the height, 25, 25. The positioning must be absolute relative to the contents block. The background color here are just RGB, color RGB, as a string like this to the background property of style. And I just randomly thought it would be a good idea to have an opacity of 0.6. This is left and top positioning, also with the random function. Random, so this gives me a random number of the grid size width. So this is between 0 and 1 times the grid size width gives me, of course, a random position, width and height. I also subtract the block size divided by 2, so the blocks will never go outside the rectangle. Not needed really, but did it anyway. Here applying the style properties. And then of course I have to append it to the contents block. This rectangle. This is the red rectangle, this one here. Big red rectangle. And it's, you know, just give it some random properties so it's clearly visible. Also append it to contents. And then we can easily see what's going on when panning or zooming. I just refresh it every now and then, so it will be reset to 0. So this is obviously selecting some of the elements that I'm going to need in my later calculations. This is some properties. Am I initializing zoom, which by the way I removed to make it simpler, so I just do this. This is also removed. Oh, I can clean it up. I can even clean it up. Panning allowed is in fact a property that is being still needed, and the zoom factor as well. Here we have a translate thing that will be used in the random method we will see later on. And here we have some more initialization. I think this was for testing as well. Let's just remove it. Bye-bye. See if it still works, because I'm just randomly removing. Yep, still works. All right, so at the bottom here, I added some events to the grid div, which is the green rectangle, by the way, which is not being zoomed or transformed. So that way, when I put the events to that element, I can also, it still works when I click outside of the contents block. So that's why I did it. First one is not, I'm not going to the zoom, but I will start with the mouse down event listener because it's pretty simple. Mouse down is just storing the initial contents position, which means when I put the mouse down, I want to know where this X and Y position relative to the grid is. Same goes for the mouse position. I need the mouse position when moving the mouse. I need to know where I started moving the mouse, so I can subtract them from each other and know the difference between them, so I know how much I have to move the contents. So I store that, and I say panning is allowed because I only want to pan when the mouse is down. Immediately gives me a chance to talk about the very simple mouse up, because it just says panning allowed is stopped. So once panning allowed is true, the code inside of mouse move, that is inside of this if block, is being executed. So mouse move is always executed, but this part is only executed when the mouse is down. Here I have a mouse position X stored in mouse move. Whoa, wrong key combination. Mouse position X stored and mouse position Y stored. And here, if panning is allowed, I can calculate the difference. So I calculate the difference between the pinned mouse position, which I call that object, the difference between the pinned mouse position and the current mouse position. That is the amount that I'm moving. When I add that to the initial contents position, so say, well, when you started it's 0, 0, 0, but if I do something like this, it's 100, 100. So this would be 100 plus the difference that I'm moving the mouse from the initial mouse position. I set those values to the translate object because eventually an update, this translate object is transformed to a matrix translate property, and that will eventually show the change in your browser window. So this one, we had this one already. This one is the most difficult event listener because it's about zooming. And this took me quite some time to get right. First of all, zoom factor initially is 1, of course. And this calculation here is only done to see if I should even calculate what's below here, because I don't want to be able to zoom in or out infinitely. There's a max to it, so I can't zoom further out right now, just as is the same as that I can't zoom further in than this. So first, this is being calculated to see if we have to continue making this calculation. So if it's larger than 3 or smaller than 0.4, stop anyway. This has to be done straight away. I was using the same variables later on by, you know, defining them on top. Say zoom factor is something, same type of calculation, and I use that to determine to continue and use the same variable to make the calculations. But that would trigger some really strange behavior, like this thing jumping all kinds of directions and very unpredictable behavior. So eventually I just came to the conclusion that we had to calculate this and return immediately without using any of this calculation later on. We also have to store the old zoom factor, so that's what I do first. Say, before this all has been calculated, what was the zoom factor of when the event was triggered before? I will add the same thing as I've been adding here in this check here. So I say zoom factor plus is the delta y, which is a property of the event when scrolling, divided by 5,000. 5,000 is completely arbitrary. It's just because I think it feels all right. And yes, I need to store the mouse position, and I need to apply the zoom factor to this translate object that again is used later on. And here is where the actual magic is happening, because I need to know while zooming how much the X and Y position has to move at the same time, because I'm moving the contents object and I'm making it smaller at the same time. This is the trick. So how much does it have to move the X and the Y position while zooming? This calculation is for that. Essentially, I'm taking the grid size, the original grid size, and what the grid size is when the zoom factor is applied to it. And I take that difference between those two sizes and use that to calculate how much it should move in what direction based on the current mouse position. Again, I will share the link to this code pen so you can have a good look at it. Right here you can see that the old zoom factor is stored because I have to divide the zoom factor by the old zoom factor to make the calculation work properly. I would encourage you to just remove this and see what happens. It will give some very strange results if you don't do that. Here, the calculated X and Y position again is used on the translate object, which eventually is being used in the update method, which is called also on zooming. So I'm using a matrix transform property, which is a CSS property. Here the scaling is being applied on the X and the Y axis, as well as the positioning that is changed on the X and the Y axis as well. And we only have to apply this matrix to the transform style property. And well, that's pretty much it actually. So if I go here and select this contents element, let's see if I can show it. Those are the blocks, you know, all the 50 blocks. And here we have the grid, which is the green block, and this is the contents. And when I start moving it right now, you will be able to see that it is applying this matrix thing. So zoom factor is applied on the X and the Y axis, and we have the X and the Y position changed here. One thing I should not forget to show is that in the CSS properties, This is something I didn't know. A colleague of mine helped me with it. I have to set the transform origin to 0, 0. If you don't do that, things will go strange as well. So once I have this in this very simple JavaScript code that is, well, this is just for some visual elements. I could have done that in HTML as well, of course. But in the end, it's only this code here from here to here that facilitates panning and zooming, which is really much more simple than to try and get it into the code that is way more complicated on many levels. So I just integrated what I learned there in my application. And I have similar events here on mouse down, like this one, on mouse move, which has also checking, should I be panning? Yes, if I'm panning, delegate it to this function here on panning, and it does similar things. So it's straight from what I learned from the CodePen project. And that way, this whole zooming and panning came to be. Thank you for watching this. I'm still learning, just trying to be useful, sharing useful things here. I'm not sure, well, let's say that I'm still learning. So please give me comments and feedback. If I'm going too fast, too slow, skipping too many things, you need more information, better information, just let me know. Thanks for watching. Please like this, share this, subscribe to my channel if you want. That would be really helpful. Thank you again. See you later.